I'm going to walk you through the process that I use to build a FieldStation42 cable box that I sell on Etsy. You can find these on eBay or Facebook Marketplace. First things first, I take it apart and save all the screws to the side because I'll be using some of them later. The board that comes with this is not super useful for this project. Next thing I do is I flatten all the metal standoffs and bumps from inside the case. Next is a 3D printed Raspberry Pi standoff that I modified so it would stand away from the case and allow the Wi-Fi to breathe. I use a neodymium magnet in between the standoff and the case to hold it down while I glue. I'm using a Raspberry Pi 3 because I didn't want to get epoxy on the Raspberry Pi 4s I actually use. One of the last metal modifications I make to the case are the AV holes. I use a 3D printed faceplate that is included in my GitHub to align and make holes using a stepper drill bit. I then use an AV port that I've pre-soldered the ground together. I clamp it together and I use a little metal standoff so I can clamp it to the case. Once I have all the pieces I'm going to epoxy ready, I mix some epoxy. I did not show exactly where I put the epoxy because I like to get up and close when I'm doing it so I can get it in the right spot, but I glued the power, the USB, the AV port, and standoff. I find the best thing to use for a Raspberry Pi composite is just telephone cable because it keeps it all organized and it has the right amount of conductors. Be sure to tin your wire ahead of time so you can just pre-bend it and shape it into the proper location. Just solder the appropriate ones and make sure if they're different colors to write it down and to heat shrink everything. On the Raspberry Pi itself, this is a Raspberry Pi 4, there are 2 points that you solder the power to. One is TP7, and that's for ground, and the other is TP1, and that's for power. This is a non-PD hookup, so using a PD power may not work, but that could come down to the cable. Next is a composite. Composite has 3 points on the Raspberry Pi 4. TP24 for video, TP23 for right audio, and TP22 for left audio. I use TP9 for ground, but there are other ground points around the same area. Make sure these aren't bridging, and once everything's in place, I grab one of the screws from the inside that I put aside. Number one thing that you want to make sure is that if you use a screw that has a big head, to make sure it's not shorting the last 2 GPIO. Heatsink is not required, but my understanding is that the Raspberry Pi 4 thermal throttles and reduces speed and all that if it gets to a certain temperature. So I just put a heatsink on it. I won't be covering software setup since FieldStation42 already has a GitHub website that explains all that. But I do have a pre-made image on my GitHub that includes the scripts that I've made to supplement like remote control and rebuilding and stuff like that. This build assumes a flash drive named AnalogTV, all caps, no spaces, and the folder structure as outlined. The actual FieldStation42 folder lives in the home directory of the analog user. The 3 folders that are on the USB drive in the back are symbolically linked inside of the FieldStation42 folder in the home directory. When adding media, you want to aim for H.264, since there's a built-in hardware decoder on the Raspberry Pi, and a bitrate of 1000 to 2000 kilobytes a second. One of the easier things to do is if you have content on YouTube is to just use YTDLP with a 480p flag that downloads H.264 versions. That way YouTube does the encoding for you. Once you see a successful rainbow splash screen, you know that your composite out is working. You should see the splash screen next, and then after a little bit, you should hit your desktop, the screen will go black, and that's the initialization of FieldStation42. You'll then see the on-screen display, and if everything is set up on your USB drive correctly and indexed, you should start seeing content. If you haven't rebuilt your catalog, you'll have to do so via the AnalogTV script, or most models of AnalogTV that I build nowadays have a rebuild button. Double-click the rebuild button in the back, monitor the rebuild process using this script, and it should reboot automatically with the new media fully indexed. Button time. This case in particular is a little weird with its buttons. I can't just modify the PCB that comes with it, so I had to provide my own, but thankfully I have a lot of those and these buttons. I just have to make sure that the buttons are aligned horizontally so I can do the ground plane along one axis instead of having to zigzag. And then the rest are just connected to each particular component, which is outlined here. Be sure to pre-tin. I try to keep them all spaced in the same area, and you'll see why later because I can tape them all together. But yeah, and you might want to secure it down. One thing I didn't show is that I put some glue just to secure it down. Same thing with the LCD in the front. They're all basically grouped together. GPIO 19, 16, and 20 are for the buttons, and GPIO 26 and 21 are for the display, but the ground and volt pins, since those are the only ones, at least the voltage pins are the top right, and those are the only ones on the Pi, I use the ground that's right next to it. Tape those connectors together for easier removal, and that's the button hookup, and this is the final result.
Chocolatey tasting cookie crisp.
Yeah. Used to say, ooh, ha, ha, ooh.
And I'm getting ready to conduct a real mariachi band.
I want to play Plinko or punch a bunch.
Because I love the disparity and the division.